the purpose of content is to build trust at scale and to really understand the importance of meaningful, real, and very personal working relationships.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Talk. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you everyone for introducing yourself too. Really amazing to see so many people from all over the world. We've got the Philippines, Italy, Dublin, Port Slade, it's Ireland. Amazing. Thank you so much. So whether this is your first time joining an event with us, or if you've been to one of our Marketing Talk events before, thank you so much for choosing to spend your Friday afternoon with us. We have two incredibly exciting speakers lined up for you today, which I'm delighted about. Firstly, just to introduce myself, my name is Catherine and I am the host of Marketing Talk. I've been working with the team at Silicon Brighton for a good few months now, actually, to bring Marketing Talk events and what is fast becoming a marketing community to life. And yes, so I'll be hosting today. Quick bits of housekeeping, just to let you know, this session is being recorded so that we can share it afterwards. We're streaming live on YouTube too. At any point during the talks today, please do use the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask our speakers any questions. We build in plenty of time at the end of both of our speakers' sections so that we can answer all of your questions. So please don't be shy. So a little more about what Marketing Talk is all about. So this is our fourth event now, I think. We started Marketing Talk as a way to bring together marketers of all backgrounds, industries, career stages, who are looking to take their skills to the next level. And we're all about bringing you speakers who will share advice and insights, yes, all about marketing, but also sometimes about the other skills that you need to thrive in a marketing career too, which is a great example of what we've got for you today, which I'm very excited about. We're also looking to really build on the community aspects of Marketing Talk too. So that's why it's so important for us that everyone's introducing yourself today, although we can't see you and you can't see each other. This really is a place for us all to connect. So please do use that chat, use that Q&A, and we hope to do in the future some breakout sessions too. So keep an eye out for that. I also want to say that everyone who comes along to any of our events is invited to speak at a future event too. Getting that first experience of public speaking under your belt is really empowering, and doing it virtually is a great way to do it. So even if you want to share something really briefly, even if it's just for a couple of minutes at our next event, please do let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn really easily, or any of the members of the Silicon Brighton team will be able to help you too. Silicon Brighton also have a really brilliant community hub, which will enable us to share the slides afterwards and keep any discussion going. So we'll tell you a little more about that and how you can join it later. So on to the agenda for today. So we'll hear a little bit more about Silicon Brighton for anyone who is joining us for the very first time. And then we've got two brilliant speakers lined up. So we've got our keynote from Toby Moore, which is going to be all about content, generating ideas, and really humanizing your content. And then we're going to have a fireside chat with Khadija Mella, who's going to be sharing her really inspiring, brilliant story, which I can't wait for her to be able to tell you about. And she's going to be sharing her experiences of building her personal brand, setting goals, and really achieving your dreams, which is very exciting. We'll finish off with a link to our next event if you want to save the date now, as well as a bit more info on that community hub that I just spoke about. So first up, I would like to introduce Kieran from the Silicon Brighton team, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the brilliant work that they're doing. And Kieran is the community director at Silicon Brighton. So let's hear a little more from Kieran.
Thanks, Catherine. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So thank you for organising the event, and also to the speakers for coming along to share their knowledge and expertise. I'm sure we're all in for a really great and informative session. As mentioned, my name is Kieran and I'm the Community Director at Silicon Brighton, and we are really pleased to be able to support these marketing talk events as we understand how important it is for people to be able to learn amongst peers, build connections and have that sense of community and belonging that can help to empower us all to drive our careers and businesses forward together. And that's really at the heart of what Silicon Brighton is all about too. We are a new community-led initiative to support digital growth in the city. We began last year by working with the local tech meetup groups to help raise their profile and provide individuals like yourself with free opportunities for networking, training, upskilling and development to try and help everyone benefit through the sharing of expertise and the forming of new partnerships. So far, we've helped support over 50 events, raised thousands for our local NHS and given a platform to over 100 speakers to share their knowledge. If you haven't come across Silicon Brighton before, then I'd urge you to take a few minutes later to visit the website, which is siliconbrighton.com, where you can learn about the upcoming events and browse through some great resources and speaker talks from the previous sessions. You can also sign up to our monthly newsletter via the website footer, which will help you stay informed about all that's happening locally in tech. Alongside the events, we're also building a new community platform. This is a free online space to help everyone make stronger connections and learn about the different meetup groups in the city and access resources and forums where you can ask questions and seek advice. It's free to join and create a profile account, and it's a welcoming and inclusive space. So regardless of your experience level, whether you're a student, just starting out, an industry veteran or freelancer, we're hoping to turn this into a useful space for all those who are interested in the local tech scene. And if that sounds like you, then you can check out the beta version of this platform now by visiting the Join Us tab on the website. Anyway, really pleased to be here today and looking forward to the great talks that are in store. So without further ado, I'll hand you back to Catherine now. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kieran. Okay, well, it feels like about the right time to introduce our keynote speaker, which I'm very excited about. So we're very excited to be introducing Toby Moore today, who is the founder of Content Club, which is a community and consultancy for content creators. He's also recently launched a new software company called Poster, which is also all about content, so content creation and automation tool. I'm sure there's lots of content marketers on the call today, so please don't be shy in asking lots of questions to Toby throughout his talk. A bit more about Toby. So he's the curator and director of TEDx Brighton too, which has been running in Brighton for about 10 years now. So it's the largest and longest running TEDx event in the country, which is no mean feat. He's also involved in a number of local youth charities, including Brighton Youth Club and the Hummingbird Refugee Project, which is wonderful. So Toby will be talking to us today about how to humanize your content, generate ideas faster, and make the content that you do produce unique and engaging. So without further ado, I will pass over to Toby. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I hope you are having a wonderful day and feeling fantastic and fabulous. My name is Toby Moore, as Catherine alluded to, and I am going to be taking you through a journey into how we humanize our content as content creators. Today's quest is all around trying to challenge our way of thinking and challenge our way of planning, producing and promoting the content that we create in order to try and build better relationships with the people that we're trying to create content for, in order to get closer to what it is that we really want to achieve as content creators and so on. So the idea of humanizing our content is our overarching theme. And our goal is to really challenge and redefine our purpose of creating content. And I suspect, depending on your approach to creating content and marketing what you do, some of you will either hate this and think it's stupid and ridiculous, and some of you will think it's wonderful and great. I certainly hope. But either way, I really want to challenge some of the traditional ways that you approach ideating and planning the content that you make. But a little bit about me before we jump into that. Catherine sort of talked a bit about some of the things that I do. I'm one of those very frustrating and annoying people who wears lots of different hats and spend a lot of time each day swapping them in order to do different things. But the first thing that I do is that I run a company called Content Club, and Content Club is a community and a consultancy for content creation. And most of my work is spent building content strategies for brands, and then supporting sort of freelancers and solopreneurs in order to turn content creation into their superpower, when perhaps it isn't necessarily their first, second, third, or even fourth or fifth skill in their toolbox of running their own business. On top of that, I do a couple of other things. As Catherine mentioned, I am the director and curator for TEDx Brighton, which is a very joyous job. And I suspect most of you are very familiar with TED and TEDx talks. Each year, TEDx Brighton hosts around 1,500 people at the glorious Brighton Dome, and each year we organise sort of 20 talks plus that all end up on those magical TEDx talks that you so enjoy watching on YouTube. And my job is leading the volunteer team, and then also get the very exciting job of choosing all the speakers too. I also support two charities, which is the Brighton Youth Centre, and which is a really cool youth centre in the heart of Brighton with a skate park in the roof, and the Hummingbird Refugee Project, which is also a very important charity supporting young refugees. As Catherine said, I've recently launched a software company as well, which is called Poster. Poster is a content repurposing and automation tool. Really simple. You can turn your blogs into buckets of social media content. You're more than welcome to give it a try over at poster.works. But I won't bore you with a sales pitch for that today. Instead, what we're going to be looking at is redefining our purpose of content. So whenever I am at an event or doing a talk like this, particularly when it's a live event in a room full of people, I always like to open up with a question, which is, what is the purpose of content? And you're more than welcome to throw things into the chat group if you think you know what the answer to this question might be, or you've got something up your sleeve. But normally when I ask a big group or room full of people, what is the purpose of content? I tend to hear words like this, that it's around reach and engagement, or trying to create leads and sales, or trying to drum up new interest in their brand, or drive awareness, or get traffic to a website, all of these sorts of things. And I'm sure all of these things are important to you, or some of these things are more important than others. But as with all great questions, there are no wrong answers, but there are, of course, some answers that are more right than others. And for the purpose of this talk, the right answer, or the answer that is more right than all the others, is building trust. The purpose of content is to build trust, because trust is the most fundamental element of any working relationship, or any relationship in general. But when it comes to how we sell, and ultimately how we build effective relationships with customers, with our community, with the champions of our brand, and so on, we always want to make sure that we're focusing on trust. And what content is in a unique place to allow us to do is to build trust at scale. So as individuals, we can build trusting relationships with each other through conversations and through the relationships that we have with each other. But content allows you to go beyond that and take all of your trust building skills and replicate those in an unlimited fashion across the internet. And this is important, particularly from a sales point of view, because at the end of the day, people buy from people. And I suspect if you were to look at the most important and most significant and most successful relationships in your business, and the people that buy from you and your customers and so on, those customers and relationships will be there because that you've created something that is unique between the two of you. You know, they have bought from you because they believe in the way that you communicate, in the values that you show up with, in the way that you choose to work, in the way that you choose to articulate your ideas and your ambitions and so on. And that's what most ultimately will attract people to work with you. Our job as marketers and content creators is to figure out what underpins the very best bits of all of that, and be able to replicate it into content, and then use all of the techniques and tactics on top of that, which allow us to create that demand, to be found on Google, to have effective advertising and so on. And of course, I should have clicked space much earlier. People buy from people that they trust. And this whole trust element is really underpinned by the characteristics of you and how you show up in your work. And this whole idea of building trust at scale is effectively underpinned by your ability to put the very best version of yourself into your content and understand the qualities that make really great and unique working relationships happen. So how do we do this? What it is how we build trust. Why we do it is because that allows us to scale our sales and marketing and so on in a way that is most authentic and real. But how do we do this? Sounds really nice, but how do we do it? And one of the things that I'm a big fan and champion of is how do we de-fluff things that are traditionally very fluffy. So something like building trust can often be seen as something that's quite untangible and, like I said, quite fluffy. In order to make it work, we need to successfully de-fluff the idea. So there is a set of techniques that are popular and work and we can use in order to make this happen. And the simplest thing that we can do as a first step is to really understand our face-to-face interactions and conversations that we have. The reason that this is important is because your best customers will always come from your best content, and your best content will always come from your best conversations, and your best conversations tend to come from your best customers. And there's a magical loop there that hopefully is easy to visualize in your head. But we really want to understand what makes a really great face-to-face conversation in your work and in your business. Sorry. There's a couple of different approaches to doing this. And when you're researching ideas for content, you know, there's a selection of different techniques that you can use, from doing market research and surveys through to search intent and SEO research and so on. But my favorite method to use is to really get into a place where you can imagine and remember and visualize the very best face-to-face conversations that you have in your work. Sometimes in real event, or not real events, but in real life offline events, I do an exercise with everybody in the room where we close our eyes and we imagine a person we enjoy working with. We imagine ourselves having a conversation with that person, and a successful conversation. So maybe that's us selling something to someone, maybe that's someone selling something to us, maybe that's working with an existing customer or whatever. However, we need to imagine ourselves in that conversation, then we need to step out of it and then look at what are the qualities that we're conveying. And I like to break these qualities down into education, empathy, and entertainment. And these are the categories that we can define our best qualities around. If we start to understand what makes a really great face-to-face conversation, then we can start to unpick all of those qualities and build them into our content, from a tone of voice point of view, from a ideation point of view, from a topics and themes point of view, from a questions and answers point of view, and so on. And that's where face-to-face conversations and interactions become a really useful tool in both deciding how you're going to create content, who you're going to create it for, what topics you're going to cover, how you're going to approach that, and so on. Just to talk about this and how it works in real life. When I've done this with groups of people in the past, what's a really interesting experience is then listening back to what people say. And the last time I did this at an event, there were two people that I then asked to share what they had seen and what they felt and what they heard when they were doing this. And one person who was a financial advisor was like, oh, we had a very intellectually stimulating conversation, exchanging lots of views. It got very deep very quickly, all of this sort of thing. And then somebody else who runs a marketing agency, she was saying, oh, we were joking, we were having a lot of fun, we were solving real problems and so on. So it's really you can very quickly start to understand what makes these important face-to-face interactions that you have in your business unique to you. Not just unique to you, but unique to the relationships that you have with your customers too. So going beyond just this and going into the next level of how, through Content Club, we've developed a framework for doing this. And the framework is underpinned by 4 pillars that all just happen to start with the letter P. And these are purpose, planning, production, and promotion. And these are really important concepts to build your approach to content around. Excuse me. Not just from a how you manage your time point of view, but understanding the state that any piece of content is at any one time, understanding how you approach managing your time across a week or a month in order to make sure that all of these things are done in equal and in a proportionate way, and also in a way of being able to understand the life cycle of a piece of content. When is a piece of content at its stage where you're defining its purpose? What stage, when is a piece of content in its planning phase, and when are you producing it, and what are you doing to promote it? And each of these pillars has a set of tools and a set of principles and a set of actions around it that we need to follow and need to use in order to make sure that a piece of content is always playing its part in our content strategy, and ultimately goes all the way back to that defining moment of purpose, which is to build trust, and to build trust at scale. If anybody wants to access this framework, it's freely available on the Content Club website, and you can just go to learn.cc.works and it will take you straight into said framework, and you can get learning for free. And there is a 0 spam and 0 sales email guarantee attached to that. So planning, purpose, planning, production, and promotion. We've talked about the purpose of this, humanizing our content, building trust, understanding our face-to-face interactions, replicating our best face-to-face interactions into our content at an ideation level, at a tone of voice and quality level, and at a level where we understand what we're trying to achieve for our business, for our customers, and for ourselves. So I want to dive into a couple of toolkits that I always use with new customers, that are focused in the planning section of this. So some of you will be familiar with like the top and middle and bottom funnel of sales and marketing and so on. When we're looking at content, we want to break this down into a couple of different categories of content which happen before people come into that sales funnel. So as a part of our planning framework, we have promotional and supporting and converting content types. And all of these types play a role in a journey that our audience goes on to eventually leading to what are our products and services. So on the slide, you'll see we've got the concept on one side, which is the promotional content, the supporting content, converting content, our products and services. In the example, we then have your promotional content might be a Facebook advert. And this is a small, easy to make, easy to use, easy to engage with piece of content that probably doesn't have a very long shelf life online either. And that might be a Facebook advert. And then we have a supporting piece of content. And the purpose of this piece of content is to gradually build trust over time. So people might need to engage with this kind of content a few times before they move to the next stage. But in the example, that's a blog post. And people might read 2 or 3 of your blog posts before they then move on to the next stage, which in this example is a webinar. So you might then ask people for their email address and their name or whatever as a converting piece of content. And really what we're trying to do with that converting piece of content is drive a sales-like conversation from beyond that. So quite often we talk about calls to action when we're creating content and planning our marketing and so on. When it gets to this converting layer, what we really, really want to focus on is not a call to action, but a call to conversation. What allows us to have a meeting with this person? What allows us to have a face-to-face conversation with this person? What allows them to get on an instant messenger or something and start asking some questions? That's what that's the behavior that we really want to drive at this level. And then we define what our products and services underneath, which in the example here is a marketing strategy consultation, which might be something similar to what I offer through Content Club, for example. Once we've got our head around this particular way of both planning our content, so making sure that no piece of content is ever operating in isolation, it's always got its part in the journey that we want people to go through, then we need to move on to how do we plan ideas in order to fulfill all of the different content types within this journey. So I tend to use a really simple audience persona. Now, this is very similar to what you might see in like a marketing or a customer persona, where we define who someone is and how many cats have they got and what's their job and where do they live and what their favorite board game is and all these sorts of things that we might want to look at in order to understand like what makes up the people that we're selling and marketing to. At a content level, we want to strip it right back, and we want to get some really simple stuff down there. We want to know who someone is, a little bit about what their role is, so we understand their goals and objectives, but then we want to understand the questions that they have and the questions that we would like to ask them. This is super important because the questions that get asked basically make up the conversation that we'll want to have with them. And if we can imagine what a real life conversation, like a really great, successful conversation looks like with these people, then we can start to replicate that process through our content. Quite often when I'm working with sales teams, we look at, what are the common objections that you get when you're on a sales call? And they'll be like, oh, they don't like the pricing, or they, it takes us too long to justify this or that. So then you go ahead and you create content that overcomes that objection before they then get to the sales call, for example. We want to take that a step further. So we want to replicate great conversations with existing customers, with prospect customers, and so on. The favoritist, most wonderfulest people that we ever want to work with. And we want to build a conversation around that. So here is an example of exactly this. Here at Content Club, like I said, we work with two kind of audiences. One are bigger brands where we sort of work on developing their team and their overarching content strategy. And the other is more like freelancers and individuals. So in this case, we're looking at one of those freelancers, and her name is Harriet, and she is a freelance graphic designer. And Harriet has a couple of questions. She wants to know, how do I create a content strategy for my freelance work? She wants to know, how should I approach pricing my graphic design projects? And she wants to know, how do I attract the right kind of customers to my website? And then when we're having this conversation, there's a couple of things that I want to know too. I want to know, what type of content do you want to create, so that I can help enable that process. And I want to know, who are your ideal customers, so that I can start taking her through this process of imagining what those conversations might look like with those customers. Sorry. So once we've built out this persona and we understand what those questions are, we want to carry those questions over to an ideation process. Now, this ideation process is really important and underpins this whole replicating our face-to-face conversations piece. But it also goes up against, not up against, but can either go in place of or in competition with other processes like market research, SEO, search intent research, and so on, trying to understand those things. I always prefer doing it this way, because it's super quick and we can create a long list of proven topics to create content around in a very short space of time. It's also free. You don't have to pay for a tool or for someone to do some research or to an agency or whatever. This is something you can do, and it's based on real life experiences. So this is a topic planner. This is another tool in the planning toolkit. And what we basically do is we take the questions that we built in our audience persona, and we bring them into the questions along the top here. As you probably recognize, this looks a little bit like a Trello board, which is no accident. So you can very easily translate this exercise into Trello if you so wish. And what we then start to do is we just start to sketch out some ideas for headlines for content underneath each of these questions. So you can see we've already very quickly just sketched out under question 1, how do I create content strategy for my freelance work? It's like, how to generate new ideas for content, 5 great content ideas for graphic designers. We've also managed to come up with an idea for what types of content do you want to create? Should every graphic designer be on Instagram right now? These are very real types of content that we could create, right? And obviously, we only have a few minutes to focus on this slide, but if you were to just spend 20 minutes going through this exercise, you could end up with something that looks a little bit like this. And here we have 5 questions, each with 5 potential headlines underneath. Obviously, with a headline, we can always go back and change that at the end of a piece of content and so on. But the headline gives us the impetus of what we are supposed to be creating, and allows us to create a structure underneath that content to fulfill it. Now, what you'll see here is we've got 5 questions, we've got 5 answers under each question, and then if we look back at we've got 3 different potential content types that we could be working with. So what does that mean? What it means is that in 20 minutes, we've potentially come up with 25 ideas for content across 3 different content types. So we've come up with 75 ideas for content in 20 minutes. What an amazing process to have gone through for your business or for your work and so on, in order to create, such a wealth of ideation for content. It's a very fast process to go through. And the most exciting and important thing about this is it's underpinned by real life experiences of working with people that that you can help, that you can support, deliver value to, and so on. It's based in real life experiences, real life conversations, which means that if you go ahead and create even just one of these pieces of content, it's already proven to build trust with your audience. It's already proven that it's going to help you build a relationship with people, and get you and meet the ultimate goal of your content strategy, which is to build trust at scale. 75 ideas for content, that is enough to keep any content creator busy for at least an entire year. So this is why I really value this particular toolkit and this particular part of the process, because other traditional means of like market research and SEO and so on and so forth have a very important role to play, but they do take time, resource, and often money. If we want to be able to, particularly if we are solopreneurs, freelancers, and so on, and we don't have the resources to do that, we want to be able to come up with a reliable catalog of ideas for content in order to create, a wealth of content, throughout an entire year or set of campaigns and so on. And then if we look back at those content types that we looked at earlier, if we define what content types sit in promotional content, supported content, and so on, and then we build templates around what those content types would be. Every time that we sit down to create a piece of content, we literally just have to pull off an idea from our ideas catalog, like you can see in front of you. We pull out a template for the piece of content we want to create. We bring those 2 things together, and we can very quickly start creating pieces of content, which again are always underpinned by the concept of building trust. And we know that that's going to work because all of our ideas are based in real life experiences. So just to reiterate, the purpose of content is to build trust at scale and to really understand the importance of meaningful, real, and very personal working relationships. What makes those uniquely successful to you? What allows you to see through, what allows you to manage that relationship in a way that nobody else could, and create successful and collaborative results with those customers, with those people, and for yourself too. Really get to the heart of that and create content that represents that, because for all of the SEO magic and advertising ROI in the world and so on, nothing is ever going to beat you showing up as you online. And again, if you want to access this framework and look at all of the nuts and bolts on how this happens, learn at cc.works, and you have a freely available set of videos and toolkits and so on, about 3 hours worth of videos that teach you how to do this. And I will now stop, and I will open the floor to questions, complaints, criticisms, and wonderful ideas of your own. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was great. It's always really useful to see a framework that you can actually go away and start using straight away. So thank you for that. Reminder that we've got the Q&A function. There's a couple coming through, which is great. But if you have any questions that you want to ask Toby, either about what you've just seen or how you might apply this specifically to a brand that you're working on, then please don't be shy. A couple of questions that I thought of actually while you were speaking that I'd love to ask you about. So in my I've worked for a number of businesses that have been both small and big. At the moment, I work for a small independent brand, but in the past, I've worked for big brands that are part of sort of wider groups. So it'd be good to know if you think that this approach would work for both big and small businesses, and how you might maybe adapt it depending on which brand you were working on.
So at a small business level, this is very easy to implement, because most of the people that work in that business will be very close to the customers and very close to the community. So it's very easy for everybody to kind of form a collective view around what a really great customer relationship looks like. And also in those smaller businesses, you tend to have maybe only one or two people really, carrying the weight of content creation. And so what you really want to be able to do is to make that person's job as easy as possible and as manageable as possible. And if that person has to spend 70-80% of their time coming up with ideas for content or whatever, or trying to prove that an idea that they have is worth doing, then you're not going to be giving them the very best chance of success. So if we can make sure that we can really accelerate that process of coming up with ideas, and ideas that are proven to work with existing customers and so on, then we are giving them a much greater chance of success, and we're allowing them to focus on the more important task, which are actually creating content and creating engagement online. At a bigger business level, it works too, but it works differently. And where I see it working the best is when you're actually working with a team of people and you want them to succeed as individual content creators. So, for example, I'm working with a marketing agency at the moment, and we've identified 4 or 5 people within that marketing agency, and we want to build them up as thought leaders within the industry. They all have their own different areas of expertise. One's, an SEO guy, one's a CRO person, someone's a data-led person, and so on. So we want to be able to identify who are their unique audience personas, and how are they going to go out as an individual to become a thought leader in the industry. So that, and what that means for the brand is that the brand doesn't have to hide behind the brand and the logo all the time. What they can do is build up the confidence and the creativity of the individuals in the team, and then send them out. Because it's that whole people buying from people thing. It's so much easier, particularly as a service-based brand. People want to be able to engage with a person, build a relationship, understand the values of the business through the behaviors of a person. And I believe, and the results that I have been able to generate with it definitely underpin that.
Great, thank you. So a couple of questions that have come through that I'll shoot over to you. So first one from Barney, would you or do you use data, for example, maybe search data, to help you prioritize which ideas to create first? Or if not, how does that prioritization piece work for you?
That's a really good question. And I think the question lies in, for me, always, particularly if you're, again, a small team, it's much more about what is manageable to you. And I think when it comes down to doing an SEO informed approach and using search intent research and so on, what that allows you to do is be really laser focused about a specific issue, and it allows you to go out and find a targeted audience for a specific problem and so on. So it actually plays a slightly different role. And and you can look at all of this as one big sort of tapestry of ideas and so on. You can be like, okay, well, how are we going to create content that is designed to build relationships and trust? How are we going to create content that is designed to find people you wouldn't traditionally be able to find if we were just doing what Toby just talked about? How would we use social media and so on and advertising in order to target people that we would otherwise not be able to reach through just focusing on organic social, for example? So it's understanding what the gaps in the journey that you're currently creating for an audience online, both in terms of discovery, in terms of awareness, in terms of building that relationship, nurturing, becoming a customer, and so on. And just understanding where do the tactics and the tools and the strategies for different ways of working meet that. And I would say that SEO is important. It's more important to some businesses than it is for others. And you need to understand what place it plays and what gap it fills. And if not being found is, if you're creating all of this wonderful content that shows people who you are, but it's not being found, then that's when it starts to fill that gap there. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I think it'd be good to talk a little bit more about data. Another question that's come through from George, who says, great talk, thank you. Would you recommend holding a focus group to ask customers perhaps what their pain points are, and to use that to develop your content themes from there?
You can do that. You can certainly do that. I think it comes down to two things. The first thing, again, is manageability and resource. So can you look at an activity like that and go, okay, if we do this, we know that we're going to be able to use that information in order to make better decisions and create things. And we know that the time and energy that it takes to do that is worthwhile. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I had a teacher at school that would always tell me that you should never assume things, and that to assume is made up of, to assume makes an ass of you and me. And later in life, I decided that wasn't true, and that you should always make assumptions and you should always build up hypotheses for things. What's important is to go and validate that hypothesis before you take any meaningful action on it. Where your market research and interviewing potential customers or existing customers or whatever comes into it, is that you might go, okay, I know that this is a question that I get frequently asked, so I need to create content in order to facilitate answering that question, and so that I don't have to be there every time that question comes up in a potential customer's mind. There's going to be other things that you go, well, I think my customers think this. The classic sort of Henry Ford thing of like, if I asked them what I wanted, they would have said faster horses. There's always going to be things like that in your business that people need, but they don't know that they need it until you're sitting there giving it to them. And these are the things that you really want to start building some validation around. So if you can imagine having those sort of aha moment conversations with people and start thinking about what are the questions and what are the ideas and concepts and things that you're going to be talking about that underpin succeeding in those areas. And then you want to go, okay, well, how do we validate that? And then you sit down with 10 to 20 potential customers, and you're like, right, okay, here's 10 topics that we think that are really interesting to you, and so on. So the key thing is to, I call it assume, validate, act, is the kind of or AVA, if you like. And this is kind of like the method that I would use when you're sort of trying to work out what is a meaningful and useful task to move forward with, and what perhaps isn't. I hope that answers the question.
It does. And a follow-up question that's come through from Jacob on the chat, actually, which is delving a little bit more around that audience profiling piece and actually persona building. Are you able to give any advice on the best way for a small company to build out personas and find the right questions to ask to be able to understand your audience? I think that there are some ways of doing this that can be quite expensive, but are there any cheap or even better free ways that small businesses can start to understand the right process for understanding your audience in that way?
Yeah, a workable and meaningful audience persona does not have to be a costly task. In fact, it can and should be a free task to begin with. And it's one of those things that you should always start from a place of how can we build this in 10 minutes type approach. And that's when you get to see where the gaps are, and then you go, okay, yeah, we need to find an agency to help us with this bit, or we just need to spend another hour workshopping this bit and we'll figure it out. The important thing, my personal opinion, when I've been through persona building exercises with other organizations in the past, is that it's very tempting to layer upon layer things, and then you very quickly lose sight of who your audience really is, because you've suddenly created 12 different archetypes to sell to. Really what you want to be able to do is think about who are the people that really represent the very best customers, and where the growth is and where the enjoyment is. And I always like to say, like, when the phone rings and it's one of your customers and you're like, oh, brilliant, it's Catherine, I love speaking to Catherine, I can't wait to pick up the phone, like, oh, Catherine, how you doing, tell us everything about what you've been working on, and it's that kind of that excitement that you get. And then there's the other customers where you're just like, oh, damn, it's Kieran again. Kieran's always asking difficult questions that I don't know the answer to, and he always wants more for less, and so if that's the emotional dynamic within your customer base, what you always want to be doing is weeding out the Kierans and promoting the Catherines. So I always think, I've got a rule of 3 when it comes to a lot of things, and personas is again one of them. I try not to exceed 3. And if you're struggling to know what questions to ask and so on, there's I think HubSpot has some free persona building tools. I'm going to really swallow my words saying that, because I hate HubSpot with a passion, but like they do have free customer persona building tools. But at the same time, like, you know, you just need to just Google it and look on Google Images, and there'll be a catalog of different persona building tools to choose from just on there. And like with all these things, like, keep it super simple. And I really like to focus on what are the questions and problems that people have, because therein lies you know, the answers that you need to provide. And just to extend on something I was talking about earlier, if I may, is these research exercises, like going down the SEO route and going down the market research route, those can teach you where what the questions are, but they can't tell you how to answer those questions. And this is why I always prefer going down this kind of understand your face-to-face interactions route, because when you start to scratch at the surface of that, you start to understand not just what the question is and how to answer it, but in what tone of voice you should be answering it, in what emotions are the right emotions to share, what level of education should you be providing in that area, how are you going to demonstrate empathy in your work. I mean, as soon as you start to understand your unique approach to managing relationships and conversations, all of those answers come out together. So it tells you what to create, it tells you how to create it, it tells you what tone of voice to create it in, and so on. And that's why I think it's a uniquely placed methodology for figuring this stuff out.
So much great advice in there. I think particularly when you are working with data, it can be quite easy to forget that there's actually a real person at the end of what you're writing, and even you know, especially in B2B, you know, there's still humans at the end of it. So yeah, great advice there. I think the rule of 3 is a really good one to remember as well, particularly if you're working for a small business, because any more than that, the actual volumes of number of people that will actually fit into that persona, they become too small, it's just highly unlikely that you're going to derive sort of meaningful value of segmenting or personalization to that very granular degree. So a rule of 3 sounds good. Alex, who has joined the call, has actually popped a link to some resources from HubSpot on persona building in the chat. So if anyone wanted to follow up on that, there's some info there. So thank you for that. Question from Peter on the Q&A, a bit more general. Peter would like to know how you got into marketing.
I often argue that I don't work in marketing, and actually the reason that many of you would have thought that my answer to the last question was pathetic and awful is because it's not my area of interest or expertise at all. I actually originally started out my career as an IT person, so I was an IT technician and then a manager for many years, and then moved into events, and then events led me into content creation, and then I worked as a community marketing manager for a FTSE 100 company for a while, and that kind of gave me the if anyone's worked for a company of that sort of shape and size before, you realize like how they are. And that's where I gladly found the confidence to go and start my own content creation agency. And I actually really struggled for a long time because I'm not a natural marketer, but I kept finding myself in situations where I had to be, and where clients and customers were expecting me to be that. And when I realized maybe 2 or 3 years ago that actually content creation is a very different exercise to marketing, that freed me, because I was able to go, oh, okay, I understand what it takes to create great content. I understand what it means to get into the mindset of being a great content creator as well. And that's where my true focus and passion lies, is having an idea and then figuring out how to bring that idea to life in a way that becomes, you know, totally scalable, and content is the perfect vehicle for that. How you then go about marketing that, I have now decided that that's somebody else's problem and somebody else's job.
Well, I do have 2 questions on that actually, so maybe we can answer them together. But there was one around, you know, once you've defined your content and what you want to say, how you decide, I guess, A, which medium to produce it in? Is it written? Is it video? And B, which platform to use to get it out? And someone described it in the chat as the gap between creating good content and actually having people see it, which I think is a brilliant way. You know, you can produce the best content in the world, but if no one sees it, put it in the wrong place, then ultimately it's probably a waste of time. Do you have any thoughts to lend to that?
Yeah, so there's two ways of thinking about this. The first is understanding where the gap is, and then the other thing is thinking about where the wins are. So the gaps, you have authority gaps, you have relevant gaps, and you have quality gaps. Authority gap is basically where, you know, you're not getting, people are trying to find answers to something, and the people trying to answer those questions are not experienced or skilled enough. And if you do have the experience to step in and answer those questions, then you can start taking advantage of the authority gap. And then you've got the relevance gap, which is about, you know, if someone is looking for something and the questions and the answers don't line up, which if any of you are parents in the room, you'll often find when you're looking for answers to why is my toddler eating the sofa or something like that, and you'll suddenly find that people have got all sorts of answers that are totally irrelevant and useless, but misguide your actions as a parent anyway. That's that relevance gap. So you need to be able to find the right answer for the right question and so on. And then there's quality, and quality is where we start to really look at the content type, because it's like, okay, well, someone's written a blog on how to answer this question, but that blog doesn't actually necessarily go into enough detail around this, or it doesn't visualize the topic enough, or it doesn't make it digestible enough, or something like that. So them going, okay, well, if we were to create a video around this theme, or we were to create an ebook around this theme, you start to understand how you can compete with your competitors through content by one-upping them in content types. So yeah, like I said, if someone's written a blog, you know, you write an ebook. You know, if they've written an ebook, you do a podcast. You know, and it's making sure that that you're always kind of like meeting the need in terms of how digestible, in terms of how easy it is to read and use and so on. And I mentioned these 3 E's earlier: education, empathy, and entertainment. If anybody takes part, chooses to divulge into the framework stuff, there's a lot of content around how you do that. But I always like to grade the content quality around how educational is it, how empathetic is it, how entertaining is it. And entertainment, I mean, in terms of like, how does it convey personality? So that's the first way. Sorry, I'm taking a very long way around answering this question, but that's the first thing, is understanding the gaps. And then the other side is understanding where the wins are, and the wins come from what you are able to deliver, and deliver well, and deliver quickly. So if you are an excellent designer, for example, you know, go and create excellent design, go and create infographics, go and create carousels for Instagram, go and create, visual stuff. You know, if you're a natural writer, you know, go and create blog content, go and create ebooks and stuff, you know. So thinking about where your strengths are as a content creator is a great steer towards understanding what content types to work with. Most importantly, the big word in all of this is manageable, particularly if you're alone or a small team. If you give yourself 10 different content types to work with every month, you'll fail. And not only will you fail, you'll then perpetually fail, because you won't have achieved the thing that you wanted to do, and then you'll lose motivation and energy to do it, and then you'll just do nothing. So I really like to think about it in terms of, you know, I showed you promotional, supporting, and converting content. You want to pick one content type to start with in each of those categories: Facebook posts, blog posts, webinars, for example. Like, right, I can create a webinar every quarter, I can create a blog post every month, I can create a Facebook post every day. And that gives you the manageability of your content strategy. As soon as you get more complex, you run out of steam, and then you run out of motivation, and then nothing happens.
Great. Okay. I've got loads of questions coming through now. I've got 3 minutes left. Okay, let me have a look. One from Dana that's come through, which I think is a great point, which is, if someone has looked at what you've done today and thought, right, okay, I need to start again with my content strategy, there's some good tips here that I'm going to start using straight away, but that could mean that the content that they now start producing is drastically different to what they've been putting out thus far. Any tips on how to keep that flow going, so that it sort of still feels on brand and it still feels like it's coming from the same brand, I guess, while also easing in a slightly better, more strategic approach?
Yeah, well, I think first of all is to not overthink that process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are very, very, very few people out there in terms of a customer prospect community point of view. They're going to be sitting there with a checklist marking off your content based on what traits and personality things it conveyed last month and what it conveys this month. You know, if you see an opportunity to be better and you know that you can take it, then you should. There's no point compromising. You know, compromise can be tied up in the bureaucratic battles of convincing other people in your organization or whatever that this is the right thing to do. Like, I can understand that. But being worried about it being too drastically different to content of the past, I wouldn't worry about at all. What I would do is take a small amount of time to audit the content that's already out there and figure out what repurposing opportunities you do have, so that you can, again, it's the quick wins, it's the low-hanging fruit. It's like, okay, well, if these 3 or 4 blog posts and this ebook or whatever generates 90% of your success, which is often the case. In a previous company of mine, we built a software tool that analyzes the data from Google Analytics of what content is performing well, and then we looked at sort of AI style metrics like tone of voice and emotion and so on, and word count, all these sorts of things, in order to define what the qualitative characteristics of your best performing content was. But one of the things that we discovered whilst going through this process is every single customer website that we looked at, 10% of the content represented 90% of the traffic and engagement with the website. It's always, what I have now learned is that is always the case. So you want to go and find out what that 10% of content is, understand why it's successful, and then start to carry over some of the success into your new content. But, you know, to answer the question, come back to answering the question and answer it succinctly. Just crack on with making content that you think is great, and don't get hung up on what hasn't worked in the past, because no one is watching at that level of scrutiny, I promise you. Yeah,
I'd echo that. I think one of the things I remind myself on a daily basis as a brand marketer is that no one is thinking about this product, this brand, as much as you are.
It's a sad truth, isn't it?
It is a sad truth. I think the point around repurposing content is a great one as well. I think sometimes we can be guilty of constantly thinking like, what's next, and actually something may have been produced months, maybe even years ago, that fits the bill, that actually needs a spruce up and a rethink, you know,
of course, kind of way. If anybody wants a very quick and easy way to repurpose content, you're more than welcome to head over to poster.works and use our repurposing tools. I welcome it.
Well, I will give you a chance to share a bit more about that. Actually, we are out of time, and there are still a couple of questions. So I'm really sorry that we haven't been able to get to them, but I hope that we've been able to cover in a certain amount of detail what you wanted to hear. And I'm sure Toby won't mind if you want to drop him a line on LinkedIn, etc. But to finish up, Toby, to that point, do you want to share how we can get in touch with you if needed, and also how to hear more about the tools and the techniques that you've talked about today?
Yes, we very graciously used my Twitter handle in the card there. Unfortunately, I probably check Twitter about once a year. But if anybody wants to look for me on LinkedIn, I'm Toby Moore with a little rocket at the end, easy to find, and that is my social platform of choice. Like I said, and like Catherine said, Poster is a new piece of software that I've been developing. Essentially what we're trying to do is use automation and AI tools in order to super speed up your ability to create content. And our first venture into that is repurposing blog content into social media content. So for the low price of just £17 a month, you can create a Poster account today, and you can start keeping catalogs and little plans and so on of your blogs, and just at the click of a button you can turn a decent blog post into anywhere between about sort of 10 and 25 new ideas for social media content. It's early days. It's definitely in its prototype-beta stage at the moment, but we welcome all loving, friendly customers and any feedback and so on that people have to offer us on that journey is always welcome too.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Toby. Really appreciate your time and all your insights, and I will talk to you soon.
Lovely. Thank you, Catherine. Take care.
Thank you. Bye for now.